Hello, homies, and a very warm welcome to Homeopathy Hangout. I have the pleasure today of introducing Dr. Jayne Donegan to the show. Welcome.
Good morning. Well, it's morning here.
Yeah, it's
Good
evening here.
morning,
I actually feel a bit
Jenny.
bad because it's getting late here and my lighting here is terrible. So you'll have to excuse. But I am so excited to chat with you, Jane. Marcus Fernandez mentioned to get you on the show. And I clearly have been living under a rock because it wasn't until today I was like doing some research and stuff. And I'm like, holy moly, this woman has been dragged over the coals with the media and the medical profession in the UK. Normally, I ask people how they were first introduced to homeopathy, but I think you just need to tell us a little bit about what's been happening the last few years because it sounds like you've been on a bit of a ride.
I haven't. It's not even the last few years because this all started in 2002. And before that, it actually started in 1994 when I started really looking into vaccination because I was like any doctor, which is that I was, and every other person just about on the planet, I was told that everyone used to die from these diseases. And then the vaccines came along and we all stopped dying. And in fact, when I was doing pediatrics, I actually used to counsel what we thought of as the ghastly parents in the 1970s, 80s, who didn't want to give their children a whole cell whooping cough containing vaccine. And I, along with my medical colleagues, used to think that if you didn't want to vaccinate, you were ignorant. And if you weren't ignorant, you were sociopathic, because otherwise, why would you not give your own children this life-saving intervention and also save everybody else? If you didn't, you'd be putting them at risk from herd immunity. To the extent that my children were born in 91 and 93, and they had everything that was going at the time. Not unthinkingly, I'd even started studying homeopathy in 1990, but in the knowledge that I was completely correct. And it wasn't until 94 we had a measles rubella campaign where we vaccinated 7 million school children with a measles rubella vaccine. And they were saying, oh, well, if you've only had one dose of measles containing vaccine, then you have to have another. And I thought, it's okay, nothing's 100%. But then they said, but even if you've had two doses, and in those days it was one shot for life, even if you've had two doses, when this epidemic comes, then you won't necessarily be protected. So you need to have another one. And I was sort of thinking, well, I know nothing's 100%, but I've been saying to these parents that essentially the point of the vaccine is that you don't get the disease, because we're told that getting the vaccine is about 10 times safer than getting the disease. And now you're saying even two shots of a one-shot vaccine when the epidemic comes is not going to protect you. So I was thinking, A, about what I tell my patients, and B, about my own children, which is also strange because, I grew up when you were sent to measles, mumps, rubella, and chickenpox parties in the holidays. So
Me
you get ill
too.
in the holidays and not miss school. And the whole point of being ill is that you miss school, surely. So you wonder what happens to your mind as you go through medical school. So I had been exposed to holistic people who would say things like, oh, but everybody started getting better and stopping dying before the vaccines came in, this and that. And I thought, I went to a top London medical school, St Mary's Hospital in London, where Fleming discovered penicillin. And I had all the top London professors and the top London textbooks, and they all told me that this is what happened. But the thing about me is two things. One, I read things from people I don't agree with because it's good for you. And also, it gives you this superior feeling when you know that they're wrong. But I can't tell you how many times you read something that you know is wrong, and then you think, no, that can't be the case. And then they have these types of books tend to have loads of good references. You look up the references and you think, really? Oh, it's even a good study. And I think, how did I go through medical school and postgraduate training and all these things? And I didn't know that this was the case. So anyway, so I've been reading through these things. But then I thought, I have to find this information out for myself. So I rang up the Office for National Statistics in London and said, I'd like the graphs of all the deaths from the diseases for which we vaccinate since we've had the records. And they said, we've got them from the 1940s. And I thought, yeah, I've got them from the 1940s. We have a book. It's called the Green Book because it's green. But it's actually called the Immunization Against Infectious Diseases Handbook. In America, they have a pink one. And that shows all the graphs from the 1940s. They're all available on the internet. You just put Green Book vaccine, Pink Book vaccine into your search engine. Up it will come. It's all free. And I said, no, I want the ones from before that. They said, we got smallpox and TB, but the rest we don't have. So they said, call the Department of Health. So I rang them. They said the same thing, but opposite. Call the Office for National Statistics. So I rang them back and I said, look, you must have the data. And they said, yeah, we have the data. They're here in the library. You can come and get them off the shelves. So I said, okay. So I went in with my then 6 and 4-year-old daughters, and I did wonder why I was going into this national reference library when there's all these people doing BScs and MScs and PhDs. Why was I going with my children and crayons and drinks? So I did. I took all the books off the shelf from 1837 till 1899, when then there was a really user-unfriendly, very expensive CD-ROM that you could buy, but at least you could fight with it at home and not have your children in the National Reference Library. So I did, and I did all these graphs, and lo and behold, they were like the graphs from these other people, which showed that almost everybody stopped dying before the vaccines came in. And that started my journey. That's when I started looking into it. So because of this, and because of writing for an organ publication called The Informed Parent, I came to the notice of 2 mothers in 2002 who were being pursued through the courts by their absent partners to have their children vaccinated. And so the fathers were really keen to improve their children's health. They didn't pay for their food or their clothes or a roof over their head, but they really wanted them vaccinated. You know how it is. They couldn't find any other expert, and I was bringing my own children up on my own and supporting them, so I understood where they were coming from. No one else would do it. The Legal Aid Board initially wouldn't pay for an expert for them because they said no expert would support you, missing the point of the fact that experts don't support the person they're speaking for. They are there to give impartial information to help the court make the correct decision. But I realized they're going to have nobody to put a different type of point of view to the court to help them make their decision. So I agreed. And when I saw the expert from the other sides, there was one for the fathers, one for the children, and I saw their reports. They're about 3 pages long, no references. The vaccines are all safe and effective. The diseases all kill you. You must have all the vaccines. One of them was even recommending a vaccine for the child, which wasn't even for their age group. So I thought, oh, how can I make it so that they can understand? The judge can understand that there's another way of looking at this. And I thought, we work in stories. That's the thing about homeopathy. Everything's about story, symbolism. And story doesn't mean it's made up. It means how we can understand it. So I thought, I'll tell the story of the disease and what happens to it and how you treat it and what's been happening to it since before the vaccines and after the vaccines. How likely it is a child who has the basic wherewithals for health is to get it and come out of it well or badly. And the basic wherewithals are clean water, adequate food, ventilated housing, someone to love and look after you, fresh air, and sunshine, which we don't have so much in the UK. And then overall, despite anything that I'd shown or information, I said, really, if there is a disagreement between 2 parents and they don't live together, the decision should be made by the person who has day-to-day care, whatever the decision is, because they have to deal with what happens afterwards. So you wouldn't think that was too iconoclastic. But anyway, didn't work like that. The judge didn't like my opinion. It went to appeal. The appeal judge called it junk science. Because of that, the General Medical Council accused me of serious professional misconduct, tried to strike me off. They never stopped me working. This was just the basis of having been an expert witness. They said I'd quoted selectively, I'd left out important things, I'd given misleading impressions of the course of the disease. But worst of all, I'd allowed my deeply held views on the subject of immunization to overrule my duty to the court and the litigants to present an independent, objective, and unbiased view. It was all a bit of a shock, but luckily I paid my money to my indemnifiers and they thought I was a bit harmless, but a bit bonkers. And we sailed along from 2004, which is also the same, it was the same month that they accused Dr. Andrew Wakefield of serious professional misconduct. And incidentally, he also went to St. Mary's Hospital. He was 2 years above me. And on it went until we got the expert report from the General Medical Council's witness, who was a doctor at Great Ormond Street. And they said in all the time they'd been defending doctors, they'd never seen a report that was so scathing and critical of a professional colleague. And because he was so eminent, and I was so very uneminent, the panel wouldn't fail to be swayed by what he said. So they'd done a deal. All I had to do was agree to all the charges and they would make it so I'd keep my registration. I can't tell you how awful it is being under an investigation. It's terrible. It takes up all your time. It takes up all your energy. It wrecks your life, your emotions, your family. In my family, we still have problems left over from that. It's part of the process. Whether they win or lose, they'd like to win, but mostly they want to destroy you. That's the process. So it's very tempting to just say, yes, let's finish it. But then it was actually my daughter who said to me, no, you can't agree to that. And I remembered myself that I'd already said to them, it's not my registration I'm more worried about. It's my reputation. What's the point of still being registered as a doctor if that deal had ever been actually carried through? If they think I'm the bonkers woman who doesn't know what she's talking about. So I just said I wanted another opinion, and they dumped me. They stepped back and they said, if you want to stand on your soapbox and beat your drum, you can do that, but we're not going to pay for you. And luckily, I managed to find another lawyer who would help me. He wasn't a medical lawyer, he was a patents lawyer, but he understood about vaccination. Luckily, the official at the indemnifiers, who was my link with them, felt really strongly that I needed to be heard. And she also knew that it wasn't a black and white issue because she'd been a nurse in Sudan when there'd been a polio outbreak. And she'd seen there was total panic. The areas with the most vaccination had the highest cases, the lowest vaccination had the lowest cases, but it wasn't even linked like that because in between there was no correlation. So everybody was in a panic. So she knew that I wasn't completely bonkers. So thankfully, she agreed to pay, that they pay for him and a barrister. And to cut a long story short, this all happened 3 weeks before the case was going to be. So my new solicitor, Mr. Clifford Miller, he managed to get it adjourned. And if you want to know how difficult they can make it, I live in London, bringing up my children and supporting them on their own. GMC has offices in London, but they made me go to Manchester for 3 weeks. And the case was 3 weeks long. Now, if I took out the wrong kidney and the person died, that would be a few days. All I'd really said was, when two parents can't agree, the one with day-to-day care should make the decision, which is obvious. But anyway, that was it. That's to give you some idea of what it's like in the medical profession nowadays or then. But the miracle was after 3 weeks and hundreds of expert reports, and for the GMC witness, the father's witness, the children's witness, their reports, I ended up with a panel saying that I hadn't failed to be independent, objective, and unbiased beyond any reasonable doubt, and that everything I said was backed up with references. And although I made some mistakes, I made fewer mistakes than everybody else in the case. And so on the basis of that, I was the only doctor in the country whose opinion in their reports on vaccination had been found to be independent, objective, and unbiased beyond reasonable doubt by a 3-week UK statutory tribunal. It was such a strong verdict that the GMC couldn't appeal it, and they hated it. And from then on, 2007, I would get complaints by doctors about what I was saying about things, never from any patients. I had no complaints from patients. And then eventually in 2019, they sent reporters after me from newspapers to go around the country because I do lectures. I see patients, but the thing I think is most important, and it's the word doctor comes from dokeo, to teach or to lead, is to teach people. As a homeopath and a naturopath, and when I was registered as a doctor, the main thing is I'd teach people about why their bodies were doing what they were doing. And it wasn't something to be frightened of, it was something to work with and be understood. So my lectures are really important because that really improves the health of people all around the world, really. So anyway, they kept on going around following me, asking questions, trying to get me to say something that would indict me. And then they published in, I think it was the Times and the Telegraph. And so because of that, the NHS started investigating me, the GMC started investigating me, and then the writing was on the wall. So I'd had friends who'd say, look, just get off the register. Why do you want to do that? And I'd say, well, the fact is, when I stay on the register, number one, it annoys them. So, and number two, it gives people in the NHS who are not paying privately to have the opportunity to understand why their body does what they do. It gives them a holistic viewpoint. And even if it's only a few people here, there, and everywhere, it's worth doing it for that, which was a mistake. I should have come off the register. So they accused me of serious professional misconduct. They said I was putting pregnant women at risk when I said that pregnant women are sacred and they shouldn't even have a paracetamol, which is a Tylenol, never mind a vaccine. A whole load of, they said basically a lot of things that I'd said were wrong. Actually, out of my whole lectures, what they complained about was 2.5% of my lectures, and the other, they couldn't say anything about the rest of it. But anyway, that was what they said. The climate had changed by now. So it had changed a lot. So in the NHS, they made clear to me in December 2019, before COVID, that if there was a clash between the best interest of the patient and NHS policy, if you want to work in the NHS, you have to follow NHS policy. I never signed up for that, ever. And so I waited till I was reinstated because I'd been suspended. So once I was reinstated, I took myself off it after volunteering to do face-to-face COVID work because I knew there was nothing to worry about with COVID. It was no different to what we normally have in the winter. But nobody wanted me because I had a condition, which was that I wasn't allowed to administer, or discuss childhood vaccines. And remember when COVID came out, was there a big issue about childhood vaccines and COVID? Was there even an issue about children and COVID? There was no issue. But, oh, you're such hot property if you've got anything to do with vaccination about you. People don't want to touch you in case they might catch that plague as well.
Mm.
But they wouldn't, and I asked for the GMC I asked to come off the register, but they wouldn't let me go. They wouldn't let me go because if they let me go, they couldn't have a hearing. And the point of having a hearing is to make me the disgraced Dr. Donegan, like the disgraced Dr. Wakefield. So I'm privileged to be in that company. and then it became apparent, obvious, that not only were my indemnifiers not really doing a good job, they were trying to make me lose. And when I complained, they dumped me. They said, that's it, we're not funding you. After all those thousands I paid, they wouldn't even let me use the lawyer that won for me last time, because then I might have won. So then I just realized it was just really very corrupt. It wasn't great the previous time, whatever, how many of it, 12, whatever years on, we were in a different place. So I'd come off the NHS register. They wouldn't let me off the GMC one. I decided to boycott the case because I knew that if I had the case, they just, whatever I said, they twist around. And also the whole thing was a sham, and there's no point in giving credence to shams. So I submitted an 80-page report, which they didn't read out. The one condition I had was that they would please play out all the lectures so the panel could hear. They didn't. Lots of people wanted to attend online, but they wouldn't let them. They only let about 15, which included the panel. And then when they say, oh, it's not starting at 9:30, it's starting at 10:30. And then when people would join at 10:30, they'd find out it had actually started at 9:30.
Wow.
And yeah, and then when the actual submission by the GMC, the General Medical Council barrister, was given, it was orally, not in writing, so that no one could see it. And his reasoning was not written down at all, and it was given in camera, which is not public. So in the end, it was very interesting, though, because they had all these things about what I'd said wrong about vaccination, and none of those were the reasons that they removed me from the register. Thank goodness. I was so delighted. I can't tell you. People say to me, how are you? I said, every day that I'm not on that register is a great day.
I just can't understand how are they allowed to not make you deregister? If you want to deregister, surely you should be allowed to.
They threatened me with legal action because I wouldn't pay my fees. And I said, I'm not paying the fees. They said, you have to. I said, no, I don't want to be on the register. You can't I said, the GMC can't levy financial penalties. So if you take me to court to pay, that's making me pay a financial penalty for what you're going to take me to court to pay a fee for a register I don't want to be on. Be reasonable. So they wrote back after 3 weeks saying, you do need to pay it, but we decided in this instance to waive it. Anyway, so at the end of that, they removed me from the register, and hallelujah, and thank goodness. And it wasn't for anything I said about vaccination.
How dare you think for yourself and question the status quo? Isn't it just unbelievable? It's like we're allowed to question any other medication, heart medication or cholesterol or whatever.
Not an awful lot.
Not an awful lot, but
I don't want to have the statins. You may say, I don't want the statins. They'll probably say you'll probably have a heart attack and stroke and die. You have an elderly relative that you refuse the statins for, and they'll go and do it over your head. Even with the COVID vaccines, people would give lasting power of attorney. You can do it for money and for health. The opinion was that if you refused a COVID vaccine for the person who gave you, before they lost their capacity to make a decision, who gave you that power to safeguard them, if you refused the COVID vaccine, then you were not acting in good faith. And that's a reason for breaking the power of attorney. Wow. So it would all have to go to the Court of Protection, which I call the Court of Orwellian Protection, because they just enforce what the government guidelines are. And it's a sham, really. They brought it in 2005 to mean that if you had mental health problems, or you had dementia or something, or you were a child, there would be someone to speak in your voice. It's just an enormously expensive white elephant with jobs for the boys, because they just enforce what the government health policy is, and that's how it is. So there I am. So now I'm really happy. I'm carrying on. I've been doing homeopathy since 1990. Along the way, I became a naturopath, to the extent that the wonderful College of Naturopathic Medicine, which is another homeopathic college, obviously Marcus has a great college, this one does naturopathy and other things as well. After I spoke on a panel for them, and I was in trouble with the GMC, and I was going to be not wanting to work as a doctor, because if you work as a doctor when you say you're not working, or when you're not registered, then that's a criminal offence. And I was thinking, I need to get some naturopathic qualifications. And I'd been on this panel, and I suddenly thought the next day, maybe they could help me. Maybe they could do a crash course, a special crash course for struck off or about to be struck off doctors. So you didn't have to do all the anatomy and you could just do some extra bits. And they said, actually, when you were answering the questions, your naturopathic principles shone through so brightly that we've just been talking to ourselves and saying, A, we'd like to give you an honorary diploma in naturopathy, and B, we'd like you to become a patron. So what a fantastic organization. So yes, because there's certainly the GMC would still like to do me for something. You have to be so careful at protecting yourself. I do first aiding at a summer camp, and I knew this is what they'll spend their money on. And to protect myself, I spent £120 going to a course in South London for a day, which I came out with a pediatric resuscitation certificate and a named first aider at work certificate. So if they come after me, I can say I wasn't using, because you're not allowed to use any of the knowledge or skills that you used as a doctor or that you learned as a doctor. That's 40 years of my life. So now, because now I wasn't using any of those skills. I was using the ones that I learned on the one-day course.
You can't make this stuff up.
You can't.
It's
I mean,
hilarious. I just always wonder the people behind all that's, because there's actual people that are driving this, that work at the GMC and that work at the courts and these places. There's actually human beings. Like,
yeah,
how do they sleep at night? I know that they actually believe that they're doing the right thing and all that sort of stuff, but I just don't understand it. I don't understand it. And also, the reality is that 15 years ago, I worked at Flight Center as a travel agent. And
yeah,
I would say to everyone, make sure you get your travel vaccines, make sure you get your travel vaccines, because
yeah,
I had never researched vaccination myself. And it wasn't until I started studying to become a homeopath that I learned about that. My kids are not vaccinated and I've never
yeah.
vaccinated. So I do try to just remember that there was a time before homeopathy where I was
Yes.
just so ignorant, and I trust that these people are probably operating from that same place where they believe they're doing the right thing. But
There is an agenda, I was about to say, there's an agenda at the top, and there's also, when you find these big organizations, so in England, we have different political parties, but we have Whitehall, we have the civil servants. I don't know what it's like in Australia. And the civil servants don't change. And they run a lot of things. The minister says, oh, I think I'll do this. No, that's not how we do it here. And so a lot of the people at the General Medical Council are ex-Whitehall, they're ex-civil servants at the very top of the General Medical Council. Even people at the indemnity organisations, they're all, in it together, I think. That's what it appears to me. Wouldn't want to be libeling anybody. And so they just enforce that. And yet we have doctors in the UK who've been paid 22,000, 25,000 by Pfizer and other drug companies, celebrity doctors on the media telling people that they must have COVID vaccines, they're safe and effective. And does GMC pursue any of those doctors who are being paid tens of thousands of pounds to tell people something that wasn't actually true? No, they don't. They're very selective in who they pursue. They pursue people who don't follow the party line. So as I said, if you wonder why doctors don't say anything, that's why. Having said that, they ought to, because the thing about doctors is they're independent practitioners. In the UK, most medical schools, you don't swear any oath, and the updated Hippocratic Oath leaves out all the things that the original one had. I will not poison to procure death. I will not procure abortions. I will not charge the son of my teacher to teach them the art. They don't have that. And I actually call it the Hippocratic Oath anyway, because
Yeah.
but we are independent practitioners. There's a very nice GP. When I have an aunt and uncle who have severe dementia, she's unfortunately passed away. And in 2018, which was a year where the flu vaccine was not well matched with the circulating strain, in February, when it was all finished, and they were having their sort of 1 year, I'm bringing them along so you can see what they're like. She said they like the flu vaccine. And I said, no. I said, because I want to keep them alive. And she gave me this sour look. And then I said, anyway, it's past the flu season now in February. It's all gone. And she gave me another slightly sour look. And I said, and anyway, it's not even well matched this year. And then she said, I have to ask. I didn't challenge her, but I thought, you don't have to ask. You absolutely don't have to ask. If I hadn't been there, she'd have given those two people with Alzheimer's a flu vaccine for which there was no discernible benefit, for which there are only adverse reactions. Just look at the package insert. You have a whole list. Because if you have no benefit, all you have is the chance of a bad reaction. And she's a nice doctor. So what's happened to doctors?
So many people scared to, I mean, it's their livelihood. They've got their mortgages to pay and their kids' private school fees and everything else. So many people scared to speak up.
We're the people who get to sign passport forms and ID things. Doctors are supposed to be thought of as being reliable and ethical. Otherwise, there's nothing wrong with people who empty the bins and things like that. They're probably more ethical than some doctors, but no, they're not the people who are allowed to sign the forms. So they're given to us because we're supposed to be ethical. We're supposed to have something higher than just getting our money. And if all the doctors had said this COVID thing is rubbish, if they remembered the immunology they learned as fifth-year medical students, it would have been over in a day, but they didn't. They just tugged their forelock and they carried on worse than good little soldiers. They told people they needed to have it, or they'd die or they'd kill their relatives. And in terms of, oh, it's such a massive emergency and the whole world was falling apart and the politicians just did what they did. In the British Medical Journal, which is not a fringe journal, in the editorial, so it's not even on page 79, in October 2020, before the vaccine was available, well, it was just about available, Dr. Peter Doshi, who's one of the associate editors of the British Medical Journal, said in his editorial, the title was, "Will the COVID vaccine save lives? We don't know because the trials weren't designed to find out." And he pointed out that there was no information on whether it stopped transmission. It was there. Everybody could see it. Who
Has
had
it been
eyes.
retracted yet, or is it still there?
No, it's very interesting. No, he's a good man, actually, Doshi. And he's an associate editor. So, more power to the British Medical Journal for actually allowing him to publish. But he publishes good information. He's in America, and he's not a medical doctor. It's to do with pharmacy, and he knows about statistics, and he'd actually contacted the companies and spoken to them. So it was there in plain view for anyone who wanted to see. And that's exactly what it turned out to be, which is that it stops 95% of mild disease, whatever that is. And who cares about mild disease? Anyway, so there we go. That's a little bit of a long way from homeopathy, but
I love listening to you, Jane. Like, you've got such a, down the line, you just say it as it is. I really like that. Something I would love to talk about is fevers. We mentioned it quickly before we started recording, but something I see especially in new mums, and I remember myself when I was a new mum, even though I've never been an anxious person in my life, it's nothing like having a newborn baby put in your arms and go, what on earth am I supposed to do with this? And I'm so glad that I trained in homeopathy before I had my kids.
yeah,
Because that first fever with your newborn baby can be terrifying. And we get
yeah.
told to fear fevers, and fevers are bad and fevers should be suppressed. But what are your thoughts on fevers?
I do lectures on Tuesday evenings UK time. Most Tuesday evenings. I'm about to stop for August, but online. And the one I call Fever is Your Friend is the most important one I do. I do 8 or 9, but this one I repeat every 4 to 6 weeks because it's the most important one. It's the basis of everything. And whether you vaccinate or whether you don't vaccinate, you need to know how to manage fevers. Because if you don't vaccinate, you need to know how to manage fevers. And if you do, even more, you need to know how to do it, because for two things. One, the fever is after the vaccine, is part of what helps you make the antibodies, which is the whole point of having the vaccine. And B, the fever is what helps you try and detox from the toxins in the vaccine. And it's not a conspiracy theory to say that in vaccines like the 6-in-1 or 5-in-1 or 4 or 3-in-1, that there are toxins. They're put there to be toxins. There are aluminium salts, because the way the human body is, which is highly intelligent, you could even inject bits of tetanus toxoid or diphtheria toxoid. And in many cases, the body would think, I'm not interested in this. I'll just let the white cells eat it. Forget about that. But if you inject aluminium salts, they are always foreign, they are always toxic, and the body always makes an immune reaction to them. And so they're injected as a helper, an adjuvant, from adjuvare, to help, Latin and Italian. And when it's making a response to that, it will make a response to everything else in the vaccine. Now, we want it to make an immune response to the diphtheria, tetanus, polio, whooping cough, Hep B, whatever. But of course, it actually makes an immune response to everything that's in the vaccine. And if you want to know what's in the vaccine, you could look at the UK ones. You put EMC drug, which is the Electronic Medicines Compendium, and that will give you the package inserts called pill, patient information leaflet, and for everything. If you put aspirin in the box, diphtheria in the box, measles in the box, it will give you all the relevant vaccines or formulations. And there's also a summary of product characteristics, so you can see all the other things. So if you wonder why it is that we have so many allergies, it can't be coincidental that we are putting things in that make immune reactions to everything that's in the vaccine. So people say, we want you to have a vaccine, we want you to make antibodies, and then what do? Whatever you think about vaccines, we say give paracetamol or Tylenol.
They say that over here.
Or acetaminophen, whatever it's called in Australia. Yeah, give it now, give it in 4 hours, give it in another 4 hours. That's like giving the vaccine, tying its hand behind its back, chucking a ball at it and expecting it to catch it, because you're just handicapping it. So it's even more important that you know how to manage fevers when you vaccinate. But fever is the whole basis of the body. Children are born with so much vitality. They don't tolerate a lot of toxins. And when they do get a build-up, they have this brilliant built-in mechanism to chuck it out. And you'll find that every time you have a well-managed fever in a child, they will then go up a developmental step. So a baby will produce a tooth. A toddler that's banging their head all the time on the corner of the furniture will walk straight. A child you send off to a childminder or school will go up an emotional step. They'll go up a pulsatilla step, that the abandonment one. And they will do that. They'll have their fever and then they'll go up the step. And of course we say, oh, I don't know what it's like in Australia, but they say, oh, in September, when all the children go to school, they meet all these other children they haven't met all summer, and they catch all these viral illnesses. Of course, they didn't meet any children in the bus or the supermarket or at their friend's house or on holiday or in a church or a temple or a mosque or a synagogue. They didn't meet any children. Of course they did, but they didn't have that emotional issue. So they didn't need to do anything. And of course, not every child will get what's going around. Maybe, but the ones whose little friend Johnny went to Japan, maybe they will, or the ones who really missed last year's teacher, or the ones who they've just been sent away from their mum or their dad or their granny, they'll go do that step. And then we say the primary school teachers, they catch it off the children. Of course they don't, because not all of them get it. Only the ones who have got the same issues with the children. Maybe they really liked last year's mums, they're worried about this year's mums, or they really hate the new head, or they've got their own issues at home, and those are the ones who get them. But children do it, they do it so well. And the aim of my lecture is that at the end of the lecture, instead of the next time your child gets a fever, you sit there with white knuckles thinking, how long can I manage before I crack open that bottle? You actually end the lecture thinking, I can't wait till the next time my child has a fever. And so why do we have a fever? We have a fever because when the body temperature goes up, the liver detoxifies faster, the kidneys filter faster, the white cells gobble things up faster. And you might say, if it's so great, why don't we have a fever, a high resting temperature? Because, as I keep saying, the body's really smart. The body has the temperature at the right level for everyday business. And to make it at a higher level would need more energy. You'd have to eat more food, you'd have to metabolize it up, down, break it down, excrete it. So the body just has the body at the right temperature for everyday business. But whenever it has its sort of box filling up with rubbish, it raises the temperature. So with the body being so smart, you can guarantee that when it raises the temperature, it's because it needs to be raised. And yet what do? We tell people to give them paracetamol, ibuprofen. Not only does that fight the body, takes the fever down, which now we're having a problem with, they have to be detoxified in the liver. The liver's trying to detoxify the body. Now it has to detoxify the paracetamol. I won't even really talk about ibuprofen because it's such a terrible drug. You should never use it ever for a fever, ever. Because some people hear me talking about paracetamol and they think, oh, I should use ibuprofen instead.
They often get told to alternate the two over here. This is the advice that's given is alternate the two.
And exactly. And then when you take down, so now you've taken down the fever, now the body has to detox the paracetamol. When you're breaking stuff down, you sometimes make things that aren't great, called free oxide radicals. And they're like having a 5-year-old with a blowtorch going around your sitting room. But the body being smart has things to quench it. So it has glutathione, which it makes, and vitamin C, which it doesn't make. What does paracetamol use in one of its breakdown pathways? Glutathione. So you're slowing down the detox, you're bunging up the liver, and you're getting rid of the glutathione you need for this process. So it's like a lose situation. And it must be said, when you talk about these diseases, that the ones for which there are vaccines are the ones for which there aren't, because it's just as easy to die from something or become disabled from an acute disease, an acute infection for something that for which there are vaccines as for those which there aren't. It just depends on how you manage the fever. And nobody dies of the normal course of what we call an infectious disease. They die of complications. Just like when you cross the road, you don't die in crossing the road. You look right and left and you hope you won't get run over by a truck. But if you do, it's not part of normal crossing the road. Otherwise, no one would cross the road. And it's the same with the diseases. You die of the complications, which are all invasive. So instead of having your fever and loss of appetite, maybe diarrhea and vomiting, maybe a rash, maybe mucus, all stuff coming out, you block that, it goes in. If it goes to your bladder, you get cystitis. If it goes to your kidney, you get nephritis. Liver, hepatitis. Lung, pneumonia. Ears, otitis. It's not so bad, ear infections. But worse, your brain, you get meningitis, and you get your bloodstream septicemia, which is actually much worse than meningitis. we push these in because we don't manage the fevers. Now,
Mm.
for 20 years or so, I was doing these lectures and it wasn't what the guidelines were. I suppose it wasn't the 2007 one. It probably wasn't 20 years. It's probably about 17 years. And then in 2007, the guidelines came out saying from the national body, don't give antipyretics. Pyros is Greek for a bonfire, antipyretics, anti-fever medications for the sole purpose of reducing a fever in an otherwise well child. And you might think, if you had a fever, how could you be well? You can have a fever and be burning hot, which is a sign of energy, but you're fine. You're drinking, you're peeing, if you're sleeping restful sleep, you're not struggling to breathe or lying there with no energy. So they said, don't do that in an otherwise well child. That was 2007. 2013, NICE, the National Institute for Clinical and Healthcare Excellence, they write our guidelines, the ones that doctors are so busy always fulfilling all the time. You have to have the statins, you have to have the COVID shot, you have to have the vaccine because it's the guidelines. If I don't follow the guidelines, I'll be in trouble, apart from this guideline. So 2013, they repeated the 2007 one and they said, don't give antipyretics to stop febrile convulsions because they don't, right?
Ah, well, that was my next question because so many
Parents,
parents are scared about febrile
yeah,
convulsions,
yeah,
and
yeah. So
that's
parents, please listen. The American guidelines are the same. I haven't looked at the Australian ones, but yeah, do not give them to stop febrile convulsions because they don't. That is the national guidelines, not a homeopath or a naturopath or a chiropractor or an acupuncturist. Okay, that's the national conventional medical guidelines. They also say give paracetamol and ibuprofen. They're not even calling them antipyretics now for distress, only for as long as there is distress, like a headache. There's better ways of dealing with headache, but if we only gave it for distress, there'd be so much less given. Don't give them both together. Only consider giving the other one if the distress returns before the dose of the first one is due. That's the national guidelines. And they repeated them in 2019. So I don't understand with the obsession that doctors have of, but I have to ask you, but I have to do this. Those are the guidelines. I've had patients in A&E departments, particularly in COVID. One particular person sticks in my mind. She was there on her own because you're only allowed one person in. Her child had a first febrile convulsion. So they called an ambulance and they were following the guidelines, which is you go to hospital to get looked over. They said, we have to give him Calpol, which is what we call it in the UK, paracetamol. And she said, no, but he's fine. He's okay. He doesn't need it. No, you have to give it. But he's not distressed. No, you have to give it. And then they said to her, if you don't give it, we're going to call the social workers.
yeah,
So there's
that
this poor
happens over
woman
here as well.
with her child in A&E. They've got all the security guards and everything. So she let them give it. Now, when you leave hospital and you get a discharge summary, it goes to your family doctor, and if you're lucky, they will send it to you as well. It had febrile seizure. Now, we don't write much anymore. If you put in something like febrile seizure or myocardial infarction, a blurb gets printed. And then you just put a few particular things, and it's already printed the name and the date of birth. So you just put these things in. The blurb that came out from her diagnosis said febrile seizures are not caused by the height of the temperature, but the speed with which it
Yeah.
rises. Antipyretics should not be given in this situation. In the hospital of
Oh,
where in the A&E, they've been threatening her with the social services. Okay, so figure that one out.
somebody needs to pay for this because it happens in Australia as well.
Hmm.
It cannot carry on like this. Like that they're not even following their own medical advice. I actually just pulled out this Merck manual that I have sitting
Yes,
here. I like to read it just for a bit of fun every now and again. And it
yes.
was so
I
interesting
have
that
one.
in this Merck manual, it says not to give antipertussives for a cough. So not to give cough medicine for cough.
Yes,
And
yes,
I'm like, it's in the Merck manual. It's in this. It says
yeah.
not. I haven't read it. I need to see if I can see something there about fevers.
About
But
the fevers. Well,
I was so surprised when I read that. I'm like, I had to do a double take. I'm like, okay, this is a medical book, and it's saying not to actually let the body cough. It needs to get rid of it. Don't give
it's
antipertussives.
part of your non-specific immune system, coughing, blinking, sneezing. So I've had parents who actually have a copy of the NICE guidelines for fever in their bag, and they've shown it to people in hospital. And what
Great.
have they said? What have they said? They've said those are just guidelines. Oh, the other guideline, we have to follow the guideline. We have to follow the guidelines on the statins and the antidepressants and the keeping your blood pressure below this level and the flu vaccine. Oh, we have to because otherwise we'll get in trouble. Oh, they're just guidelines.
Fascinating.
And
I think is it called cognitive dissonance?
I think it is a cognitive dissonance.
It's
Exactly.
unbelievable. It's unbelievable.
Yeah. And to the point that I say to people, look, there's two reasons that you go to a health professionals. either you're really worried that something is really wrong and you want them to do something. And then often they say, "I'll just take some paracetamol and go home." The other time, you don't really think there's something wrong. You said you have this precious baby or this toddler, and they're such a miracle, and they never existed before, and you're the sole person who's responsible for them. And what if you did something wrong that you wouldn't mind injuring yourself, but you don't want to injure them? So you go along for a reassurance. And one of the problems is that if you do that and they find out there's something like they're not vaccinated, then suddenly this chain goes into effect whereby next minute they're admitted and they've got an intravenous cannula in and they're having 4-hourly antibiotics until the blood culture or even sometimes the lumbar puncture results come back, all negative, because anybody who took a proper history, which people often don't do now, and examined somebody properly, the child properly, they'd have known that there was no septicemia or meningitis, but just for the sole thing of knowing that they're not vaccinated.
Exactly. Get
Suddenly
treated
this,
completely
so,
differently.
so it's actually harm. They're actually harming them and they're
Mm.
scaring people so they don't want to go there. And what was the point of that? I was going to say, yeah. So it's really hard for people. They're not going for medical care when they need it because they're so scared about what's happening. And I say to people, look, if you just want to have some reassurance, people have this idea that hospital doctors are really well qualified and family doctors are really not very well qualified. Family doctors are generalists. But in the National Health Service, there's only 2 types of senior doctor. Those are hospital consultants and family doctors. Everybody else is a junior doctor. It helps if your family doctor has postgraduate pediatric qualifications as well. That's better. But I say, if you want somebody to look at your child, please go to the doctor, your family doctor, because number one, they're senior doctors. Number two, they have no interest in detaining you. They're trying to empty their waiting room. And number three, they don't have the security staff to detain you, even if they wanted to. It's so much safer than going to hospital because you get inside those 4 walls. And I tell you, it's really scary and it's becoming more scary. It's hard to believe what they're doing nowadays in terms of deciding that parents are not adequate parents or they're negligent parents or they're dangerous parents. And it's just based on things like parents who think. You said doctors about doctors thinking. They don't like doctors thinking. And it seems to be there's a big idea that the parents don't understand anything either. And they're dangerous for their own children, whom they love more
It's
than anything.
it's it's scary, but it is the truth. And I hear those stories in my clinic on a very regular basis. I just want to say, like, my son is almost 13 and never had a vaccine, never had an antibiotic in his life. When he throws a fever, it is epic. He throws
Yeah,
epic fevers, and I've educated them. I empower them from a young age to tell them why we do what we do, because I've had
that's so
people
important.
say their kids are 12 and they don't know that they're vaccinated, that they're not vaccinated. And I'm like, I would never, I can't imagine that. I want my kids to know why we are making the decisions for their health that we are, so that they are empowered in their decisions. So they've been taught from a very young age what a fever does in their
Why?
body and why it does it. And so they have no fear around fevers at all. My son will just lie there when he has a fever, completely still. He won't want to do anything. He'll have tiny little sips of water. And I've always said to them, listen to your body. What is your body asking for? So he'll have tiny little sips. He'll sleep a lot. And then
Mm.
don't even, we've never had a thermometer in the house. I've never
That's one
taken
of
their
the things I
temperature.
teach. I
Yeah,
say, put
never.
your hand behind the
Yes.
back of your neck, because once you know the numbers, it does your head in.
It does your head in. So I never do that. And there's several times I've thought, I'm so glad I don't have it, because I cannot believe a human is this hot. A human should not be this hot.
Yeah.
When he comes out of it, he'll say, okay, I'm hungry now. He'll start eating and he's done. That's
And
it.
off,
He
yeah,
throws the
he's done.
fever off. And yeah, you see those developmental leaps in the writing and the language, in personality, in the way that they take on new responsibilities. Like, it's the best thing to see. It's so cool to see.
It is so good. I say to people, there's not many 100% in life, but if you have a well-managed fever, you will see your child going up a developmental step. And adults, the only thing about adults is we don't do it so much. Once you get over the age of about 6, actually, you have far fewer fevers, because we're a bit old and decrepit, even though we're just over the age of 6. And so if you're lucky enough when you're old to get a fever, you should be thanking God. Thank you for the headache, which is toxins coming out around my head, and the aches in my joints, which is more toxins coming out. Thank you, my body's at my advanced age of over the age of 6 is able to go through this process. And the last thing you want to do is get rid of the things that hurt you, because then you'll be running off doing 6,000 things, because your son is so clever. He feels awful. He lies down. He takes his sips of water, open the window, no food unless you're starving, sips of fluids. And so one of my daughters, when she was at university, we have many things we don't agree on, but she knew that when you get ill, you open the window, stop eating, drink loads of fluids and sleep. And normally 48 hours of sleep for her And then she'd be off. And she said to me, Mum, she said, you can't believe what people do. They take day nurse, they take night nurse, they take ibuprofen, they take paracetamol, they take cough suppressants. She said they go to the pub. She said they even go to lectures. Fancy going to lectures when you're at uni. But she knows what to do, and then she just gets through it. And yeah, the only thing I do think about teaching your children, it's crucial you teach your children why you're doing things, because the people around them can scare them. But there's two things. One of them is when they're doing their biology exams, is you need to write the answer they want. When you're doing a PhD, you can say other things. There's a mark scheme for things that you do when you're 15 or 16 or 17 or 18. So you won't get the marks if you start. There's only 3 lines.
If
You
you
just
start
get the
challenging
right
the status
answer.
quo.
Yeah. And the other thing is, don't be telling everybody that you necessarily do things differently. If people want to go on about this and that and the other, just let them. Don't go around. You don't go around saying, oh, but we do this and we do that. You may think that's a bit cowardly, but basically you just want to shut up, because people have such outlandish ideas about health, and it really showed up in COVID. If you wanted to know, if you wanted to know how the whole Nazi extermination of Jews, everything happened, and homosexuals and gypsies and their own disabled children, how that came about, how people who of the land of Beethoven and Goethe and culture could do that, just have to look at COVID. Everybody, oh, we want everybody locked up. Oh, I'm ringing up my neighbor. My neighbor's got her daughter in the house with her and she's not in the same bubble.
Yeah.
People have their own level of what they can tolerate. And it's best that if you have a thing that's not standard, that you just keep it to yourself and talk amongst people who have the same understanding, because otherwise and it's getting worse. There'll be a witch hunt and you'll be made a pariah. It was my auntie, may she rest in peace, always used to say, you don't need to be telling everybody everything. And it took me decades to realize that she was correct.
Oh, Jane, can you tell us a little bit about miasms as well? Do we have time for that? Are you?
Oh, yeah, we have,
Do
yeah,
you?
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
So
I can't-
you emailed something about your idea of miasms, and you completely intrigued me. So I have no idea where this is going, but I just want to know what you mean about your idea of miasms.
I am fascinated with miasms. I understand that I have a different idea of miasms to a lot of the Indian homeopaths who are great masters of miasmatic prescribing, because they seem to have lots and lots of miasms and they have everything that they do miasmatically, which is very different to how I do it. But I'm a classical homeopath, whatever that means. I don't give multiple remedies, although I do give more than one remedy at a time. I usually give a miasmatic remedy, a constitutional remedy spaced out, and then I sometimes often have an intercurrent that might be a split single dose and then one every week or twice a week. So that's how I do my classical homeopathy. And the philosophy of the miasms, as I've come to understand it myself, is fascinating. You see these families and they do the same thing over and over again. And you see them and you think, so why do they just keep doing the same thing? It's like a groove in a record. And of course, this is to do with the miasms. And I say to people, so there are 3 levels of homeopathy. So you bang your head and you take arnica, and it doesn't matter what you're like, because the bang is bigger than you. And then you have the constitutional ones, which is what you're like, what you look like, what your inclinations are, whatever. But then there's this miasmatic layer, and there are far fewer remedies. I have far fewer remedies than the multiple ones that they have in the Indian subcontinent. And I say, and a couple of them actually named after venereal diseases, as it happens. And I say that, so it used to be that people didn't know about genes. Hahnemann didn't know about genes, and he didn't know about the germ theory of disease. And when we had the genes, when they were discovered, it was very lucky actually that Mendel, the monk, the Hungarian monk, was looking at pea plants that were either red, white, or pink if they were crossed, because most things are not dominant and recessive. Most things are multifactorial. And so we went into this gene experimentation and research, and there was this idea that, oh, once we've mapped out the human genome, we'll know everything about everybody, and we can tell you that when you're 37, you'll die of a heart attack. I don't know if that's a big bonus. I wouldn't want to know if I were 20 that I was going to die when I was 37, because it's not in our hands anyway. But then they found out when they mapped out the human genome that we share 70% of our genes with a fruit fly. So it's not all about genes. And before that, they'd been thinking it was environment. And now they find really it's environment, because in fact, there's a saying that the genes load the gun and the environment pulls the trigger. So it is all about the environment, almost entirely. But they don't call it environment. They call it epigenetics. Epi is on top of the genes. So why do they do that? Because otherwise they'd lose all the funding to their genetics departments. And so I see miasms as you have your inheritance, but whether they're turned on or off is determined by the miasms. And so when you give somebody the correct miasm for what you can see in their family, sometimes there's more than one, but often there's a very strong one. You not only make it so that you turn off the not such nice genes and you turn on the nice genes. But there is an idea, there's a philosophical idea that time is not a straight line, it's a continuum. So we're here and the Romans are here and the dinosaurs, if they existed, are here, okay? And there is an idea that when you treat someone miasmatically, you actually go back through their ancestors and heal them, which I think is a lovely idea. I'm very keen on ideas and stories and symbols. And if you think about it logically, the only way you can not inherit something from someone is for them not to have had it. You see what I mean? So there's this idea of healing your family from this continual miasmas, from the Greek, the fetid smell you get above a swamp. And it wasn't just a homeopathic word. It's why people used to think that people got ill from bad smells. And so I see quite a lot of psychotic, the SY psychotic, not the psychotic. And I see tons and tons of syphilinum, which is the self-destructive one. It's so interesting. You see someone who has they said, oh, my father was, they have a fracture, and you know that one of their relatives is going to be alcoholic, or they say that their relative was alcoholic, and then there's going to be fractures in the family, or there's going to be eating disorders, or there's going to be head injuries, or there's going to be multiple miscarriages, or there's going to be erosive sort of arthritis, not the one where you get big fat boggy joints, but the erosive ones, or aneurysms and things like that. And I actually saw a patient once when I was sitting in general practice, because in general practice, I didn't see particularly people homeopathically, but partners actually used to start sending me what they call their heart sink patients. Heart sink patients are when they walk in, your heart sinks.
Yeah.
But you can never do anything with them, not conventionally. But I'd see people, and there was one particular woman, she had this lovely child, and this child had these little sores on their finger. And I talked to her and I said, oh, do you have any alcoholism in your family? And she looked slightly pale and said, yeah, my father. And I said, oh, I'm terribly sorry. It's because I'm a homeopath. And I was just looking at the sores that your daughter had on her fingers. And it just reminded me of this particular homeopathic remedy, because it really does show through. The way I talk through it to people, this particular one, is that it doesn't mean your parents had syphilis, because every disease is just a manifestation of an energetic imbalance and our emotions. So we're just pieces of energy. We're energy with bits of skin and eyebrows and hair, so we can see what we look like. But if you have the disease, it starts off with a sore on a mucous membrane. And then over time, it disappears and you forget about it. But meanwhile, it's attacking your bone and it's attacking your blood vessels. And then over time, eventually, you'll have neurological problems. And then normally people would get GPI, general paralysis of the insane, and then they die. And it was very current in the 19th century. So many people before they became insane were geniuses. There's people like Alphonse Daudet and Guy de Maupassant, and of course Van Gogh, who chopped his ear off, and even people like Oscar Wilde. He didn't die of general paralysis of the insane. He died of a complication of an operation on his auditory nerve, secondary, they think, to syphilis. But before they did this, they were enormous geniuses sometimes. And there's an expression, there's a hair's breadth between genius and insanity. And I think they're talking about syphilitic people. And that's what happens. And so when you see these self-destructive things, so I say, so if you break your arm, we say you attracted it. And people say, what do you mean I attracted it? I fell over. I was crossing the road. I looked right and left, but it was raining and there was an oil patch and the truck driver was drunk. It was them. I didn't attract it. And I said, no, you did, because why was it you and not the person before or the person afterwards? Why was it? And then, so I say, so when I'm doing my holistic first aid, I say you'd give arnica and whatever, but you might want to think about for yourself or discuss with your homeopath having a dose of syphilinum for being so self-destructive as to do that. And I normally recommend, I might see one person, and of course everything is individualized, but when you see a miasm like that, everybody in the family on that side, or both sides, if it's on both sides of your family, they're going to need it, so they might as well have it. So I'm very specific in that I don't give it to people between the autumnal equinox and the vernal equinox, not between the 21st of September and the 21st of March, because that's the time when the nights are getting longer and the day is so much shorter, and everything syphilitic is worse at night. So I don't think it's a really good idea to give it to people when we're going into the time when you're going to get more likely to have aggravations. But other than that, if I see somebody, I give 10 mg one dose to adults and I give 1 mg one dose to children. And sometimes when I see somebody in a family, they say, oh, I want everybody else to come and see you, which is very nice. But then if it's anyway, I say, I'm giving you these. Your relatives might not want to know any of this, but actually it's 10 mg for an adult and 1 mg for a child. And particularly if they say, if it's August or something, and they say, I want everybody to come. And I said, if you want them to do the miasmatic clearance, get them to do it before the 21st of September. Otherwise, they'll have to wait till the following March. And I find it makes an enormous difference to people's health. And I just think that we cut out some of this generational trauma that we just hand down. We do. You see it in families, this groove, like the record stuck in the groove. And I think Hahnemann was so inspired to have been able to see this and make these theories and then have these remedies become available.
I do sometimes wonder if he was a time traveler, or it just seems that he was so ahead of his time. It's just
Mm.
quite incredible. So, do you work with just the main three miasms?
I work with the 5 miasms. I don't see a lot of serenum. So I like Sora and psychosis and syphilinum and tuberculinum and carcinosin.
Awesome.
I hardly see, maybe I just don't see it, but I hardly see Sora at all. But then there are homeopaths, like I think it was Sankaran, who said, for example, he thinks that the whole of India is tubercular and they all need a tubercular clearance. That's their miasm. I know in Ireland, it's not so bad now, but it used to be terrible, this self-destructiveness and alcoholism. The whole family would be wrecked. All these sad, depressing Irish books where he'd work all week, drink all the money that he just earned, and then he'd have nothing by the time he got back to the wife and children, of which he had many. And it really destroyed Irish society. And then you look at people like Jews. Now, Jews have always been persecuted through all the ages. But there's something syphilitic about Jews, because just like the person who says, but I didn't break my leg, it was the person who ran me over. There's something about Jews that attract that happening to them. And they need to take syphilinum to clear that miasm. It acts like a great big, it's like a symphony.
Syphilinum is a really beautiful remedy. I was so scared of using it for so many years, how we have remedy bias. And then I listened to a lecture by Hilary Dorian on using syphilinum for skin stuff. And she was saying how it's actually a really gentle remedy and she hardly ever has aggravations. And I started using it. And then more recently with Colin Griffith's work, how he uses syphilinum and thymus gland and then whatever other remedy in a triad together. So I do use quite a lot of syphilinum in the clinic in the last couple of years. And it is a beautiful remedy. It's such
It
a,
is a
I
very
mean,
beautiful
they're
remedy.
all, I always feel like silly when I say that's a great remedy. They're all great remedies, all of them. But it's pretty magical what syphilinum
I
can do.
think there is an operated dependence as well. So, for example, rust tops. I can prescribe it brilliantly for people who've got chickenpox or anything like that. I can't prescribe it for a beautifully indicated case of arthritis. It never, ever works. I just hex it somehow. And yet I had a neighbor who said, oh, I had this bit of an ache in my hip. And I went to the pharmacy and they had a list of homeopathic remedies. And I picked the one that said, like, for joint aches. And I took it. And it was great. And I'm thinking, if I'd given that to you, it wouldn't have worked.
Do
I
you
do.
think there's something, and I don't know if it's like this, you know, how we tend to have certain demographics that we work with or certain people that we attract, or maybe it's
Yes.
just our energy as practitioners, but I do think there's something in there that some remedies just don't work for some practitioners as well as they
Yeah.
do for others. I really think there's something to that.
And I also think some remedies work better for practitioners than others, because I do think it's all about energy. And we are energetic and we can make a remedy work better or work worse. In fact, I think it was another Indian homeopath who said, basically, if you have real confidence in a remedy, you can prescribe it for everybody and they'll all get better.
Yes. There's something to that. And then also how some practitioners can prescribe mega potencies daily and their clients don't aggravate. And another practitioner gives a single dose mega potency and their client aggravates for 5 years. So
Yes.
there's definitely
Yeah.
something to that. I think that's worth investigating a little bit more.
Yeah. There was a Hungarian psychologist called Balint who wrote for doctors. He wrote about the doctor, the drug. And I think we are part of the drug. We're part of the remedy that we give. Unsurprisingly, that it's a whole interflow. And so I know some homeopaths don't tell people what they're prescribing because they say, oh, well, they go and look it up on the internet and then they start arguing with you and saying it's not like that. So I say to people, the remedy is how it is. And it's like this. If you can remember the Venn diagrams you'd have at school, there'd be these circles and then there'd be little slices taken out with other circles. And so nobody's going to be a whole remedy. There'll be bits of it. And I always tell them what it is and I want them to look it up. But I say, just be aware that, for example, if you hate salt and the remedy says love salt, it's the same thing, because most people don't care about salt. They either like it or they don't care. Why do you hate salt? So when it says hate, it's the same as love. It's basically, I have a big issue around it.
There's
But one of the things I
energetic
do,
resonance.
energetic resonance. Yeah. So what I do is I describe the remedy in symbols, like Nature Muratigum and all its things to do with water and it being the mothering, and you don't have to be a mother to mother, but it's about the universal subconscious. It's all about mothering. People think, oh, this is new age stuff. We have it already in our language. La mer is the mother and la mer is the sea. It's just different spellings. Mary, the Christian icon, is Mariam, like Miriam. It means bitter sea. In Mary on the continent is Maria. That's the plural of Maris, which means sea. It's in our language. So I describe the remedy and I describe what it is in them. And as I describe it, making up my poor history taking sometimes, I'll say, and you can find this and this. And they go, oh, yeah, I have that. And I have that as well. I think, oh, thank goodness for the remedies. They're so
Yes.
great. Pick up a few keynotes and the rest of it come along. When I'm telling people how the remedy works, before they've had it, I can see them start to get better because the body is putting out the pattern. And when you repeat the pattern back to the body's going, yeah, that's it. That's it. You can see the person relaxing. You can see it already start working. So we know it's energetic. We know there's nothing pharmacological in most of the doses at all, but it really is energetic. And the body hears, it has ears in every cell of the body. And when you get the right remedy and you talk about it, the body hears.
I do exactly what you do. There's not my clients all walk away knowing exactly what I've given them and why I've given them, and they get a little materia medica lesson and everything because I feel it's so important that they are empowered. Something else that you do, Jane, that I really like is explaining the root words. And I did Latin at school for 3 years because
yes.
I love language and I love understanding where a word comes from. What's the root word? What does it mean? And so I really like that you've given us a few sprinkles of those throughout this episode.
Yes.
Yeah, it's great.
Because words are so important. The world was created out of words. And what you say is so important. And also, you talk about the Latin roots, communicating, cum, unus, it's like with, becoming one. And then when you know the words, even if we don't think of it like that anymore, like companion, it's cum panem, it's with bread, it's the person you break bread with. Now, we just know it's your friend. But when you know what the roots are, that's where it comes from. So words are very important.
Yeah, same. Absolutely. I love languages. It's interesting also. I always laugh when you go to a medical profession and they give you like a diagnosis, but actually they have just put your whole condition into Latin.
Into Latin
And
or Greek.
it makes it,
Yeah.
makes it sound really fancy, but actually they've just said all your symptoms in a different language. It sounds scary and it sounds frightening, and people feel like they, are at the mercy of someone instead of walking away feeling empowered. So,
Well, that's empowerment. That's a really important thing because there are certain things that people aren't going to be able to do to start off with. But part of what I do is I teach people because I want people to be able to start using their own things for their own emergencies or whatever. And I'd be delighted if they came to the point where they knew how to do all their constitutional things as well, because it is a learning process. And every now and again, you hear medically qualified homeopaths saying, oh, we want to have homeopathic remedies on prescription only because then people will regard us as proper doctors. And I think the medically qualified homeopaths already are proper doctors. People don't not regard you because you can buy the remedies over the counter. They don't regard you because they think you're bonkers. And so and thing is, I want people to be able to access these things. I do say, if you've got 30s, you can't do anything wrong. It will either help or it won't help. But once you get to 1Ms and 10Ms, you have to be careful and you don't just take them willy-nilly. You either take advice or you think about it or you don't keep repeating them or whatever. But the 30s, you can do anything. You can do top, you can't go wrong.
Yeah, I always think of those French homeopaths that they can't get anything over the counter above a 6C, and the amazing work that they do with 6Cs blow my mind.
Yes, but it blows my mind that they're constrained like that. When for something, so they say homeopathic remedies have got nothing in them. So fine, so let them prescribe anything. But then on the other hand, they say, oh, they're so dangerous, we have to do these trials on animals. Either there's something in them or they're really dangerous, but you don't have both. But of course they do have both.
Exactly.
Have it both ways.
Exactly. Don't get me started on that. This is going to go on a long time. Do you do any of these courses online? Because I feel this should be a requirement for every new parent to do your course or your lecture on fevers, especially.
I feel it as well. And no, not because I think I'm so great, but once you've got it, because you can have all these people saying, oh, you do it like this and you do it like that. Once you've got it and you've had it explained, I do it with the boxes, the empty box, the box with the toxins. That's how it was explained to me. And it made so much sense. And then when you see what the guidelines are, and then when you see some cases where you see what has happened and the medical profession don't even know that's why it's happened. It's not even reported like that. So no one's ever going to know. And when you hear that, for example, there's a professor of pediatrics in Texas writing in the bulletin of the World Health Organization saying, fever is an ancient adaptive response for which there are few, if any, good reasons for suppressing. And overall, though it probably doesn't cause a lot of problems, in brackets, that's because nobody looks to see what happens. But he says overall, it increases mortality, that's death, and morbidity, that's illness, in both developed and developing countries. And they also get a 26-page PDF of references showing what bad things happen when you reduce fever, and all these scientifically peer-reviewed journal articles and studies showing that it's really important that we try and make parents stop asking for it. But actually, parents are quite good now at not asking for it, many parents, but the medical profession. And it's not like just a list, it's the paragraphs that say whatever it is it's saying. Because when people see that, then they start thinking, I'm not really being an oddball, and I'm not just going by this article of faith. I'm actually going by what the top level, most advanced science is.
Amazing, amazing. So you do them online as well, and people can just register?
All my lectures are now online. They're on Tuesday evening. Yeah, they're in UK time. They're 7:30 to 9:30. I have done some lectures where I'll do a lecture if there's 15 or so people. I have done lectures at early times in the UK, so they're at a more reasonable time in Australia, if people want to get together to do one. But
yeah,
normally
that would be amazing. I'll definitely organize that for our time zone. I'd really like to do that. It works quite well, your 9-10 a.m. It's like early afternoon for us, so
yes.
definitely have to
Yes, I've done that on I've done that on a Sunday at various times because
we
I
need
had
to
some
talk.
yeah, that's right. Anyway,
and you've got the event tickets there, so people just go to jane-donegan.co.uk. So that's JAYNE-DONEGAN.co.uk, and we'll put it at the front and in the show notes as well. You've got all the courses listed there and all the lectures listed and just the Eventbrite tickets, so it's really easy to book.
yes.
Amazing. Jane, thank you so much for all the incredible value bombs that you've dropped today. It's one value bomb after the next. I really appreciate it.
It's been a real privilege talking to you, and it's great that you give so much information over to such a large number of people, because that's what we need. We need good information. Parents need good information. People need good information themselves, so that we can take our own health into our own hands, because people keep giving their power away. They say, oh, yeah, but I'm not a doctor. And I say, it's good you're not a doctor, because you've probably got some power. You've probably still got the ability to analyze and understand.
Think critically.
Think critically, that's right.
Thank you so much for today, Jane. I really appreciate it.
Lovely talking to you. God bless.